There is nothing quite like a really extra opening sequence to get players invested in a video game. But as so often has been the case, it can be tough for developers to maintain such a high level of quality from there out. It's all too common for creators to blow a ton of resources on a banger of an opening to hook the player, only to struggle to match that brilliance for the remainder of the playthrough. And whilst most of the games on this list are at least good, if not great, because honestly there aren't many awful games with great first levels, each of them ended up hitting their high point in the extremely early stages, causing everything else to pale in comparison. Hey, I guess it's the curse of having a shower instead of a grower, eh? But less of that. I am the downward spiral of Ash from WhatCulture Gaming, and these are 10 video games that peaked too early. Oh, we've all been there. 10. Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. The second Metal Gear Solid might well be the textbook example of a game that served up a mind-blowingly brilliant opening level that the rest had no hope in hell of matching, let alone surpassing. The first level of Hideo Kojima's long-awaited stealth sequel once again placed players in the shoes of Solid Snake, as he infiltrated a tanker whilst looking to snap pictures of a new Metal Gear prototype. It's a prologue more entertaining and detail-filled than most full-fat games. The graphics and art direction are incredible, the stealth gameplay is deliciously addictive, and it is jam-packed with Easter eggs. And though the rest of Metal Gear Solid 2 certainly delivers a level of batch insanity worthy of that opening hour, it was also hugely deflating that control of Snake was wrestled away and fans had to spend the rest of the game playing as Raiden instead. Ugh. It wasn't what fans were initially sold or asking for, and though it had dozens of memorable and ludicrously enjoyable moments, that tanker was a level of A+ perfection that the larger Raiden campaign just could not match. 9. GoldenEye 007. N64 classic GoldenEye 007 is often cited as one of the few video games based on movies to actually deliver on its promises. But let's face it, that was more for the all-time multiplayer suite than it was the single-player campaign. Still, the story mode, loosely adapted from the film of course, kicks off in an incredibly memorable, instantly iconic fashion, with a series of 3 levels set in Russia. The opening dam level recreates the film's jaw-dropping pre-title bungee jump before Bond blows up a chemical weapons facility, and gives the player a tank to wreck everything in sight and finally escape. It's a brilliant opening hour to a game that quickly loses momentum afterwards, with an abundance of tedious and/or frustrating excursions, namely trying to keep Natalia alive in spite of herself. It's certainly never a bad game, but the delicate balance between challenge and entertainment value is never quite as well realised as during that opening trio of missions. 8. Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. The first level of Naughty Dog's action-adventure sequel was an undeniable statement of intent from the blockbuster developer. That Uncharted 2 wasn't just going to be some quickly churned out, soulless, also-ran sequel. It meant business. The game's very first level begins as Nathan Drake finds himself in quite the pinch, throwing up quite the literal cliffhanger whilst Drake attempts to hastily exit a train hanging perilously from the edge of, well, a cliff. The sequence only lasts a matter of minutes, but makes an impression that pervades throughout the rest of the entire game. In fact, despite Uncharted 2 being quite arguably the best entry into the series, that opening is so evocative and unforgettable that the rest of the game struggles to keep up with it. Like the first game, it overindulges in monotonous shooting sequences with too many enemies, while that brief opening feels like the franchise distilled into its best and purest form, with a trained focus on far more enjoyable platforming combined with cinematic visuals and a palpable sense of tension. 7. Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit begins with protagonist Lucas Kane becoming possessed in a frosty New York City diner and murdering a man in a bathroom, after which he flees the scene as a manhunt is launched to track him down. As a virtually faultless demonstration of the game's 24-esque multi-angle approach to the story, it is nerve-shreddingly tense, and concisely lays out most of the tools the player will be working with for the rest of the game. But as a result, it is also the best crafted set piece in the entire game, which becomes increasingly silly and tough to take seriously the longer it ambles along, leading to a head-smackingly ridiculous third act that veers violently off the rails. Cage has since stated that this was due to time and budgetary constraints, forcing development time to be shortened late in the day. But Fahrenheit never quite recaptures the incredible novelty appeal of that opening level. 6. Resident Evil 4. As an introduction to the series' overhauled new visuals and gameplay, Resident Evil 4 is effortlessly intuitive, aided by the extreme openness of the village, which also does a great job of ratcheting up the atmosphere and enhancing the world building. Having a bag-wearing, chainsaw-wielding maniac slice your head off for the first time is truly a stunning moment, which alongside those creative early boss fights and the unique setting ensured that this was a Resident Evil like no other. Now, the rest of the game certainly is not a slouch, but neither the castle nor the island feel quite as dynamic as the village, with the latter feeling particularly prone to repetition. And there's a whole babysitting Ashley Graham shtick, of course. With Resident Evil 4, Capcom gave players the prime rib material up front, and the latter two-thirds of the experience just couldn't measure up, especially as each subsequent section is worse than the one before it. There is no denying the game's legacy, but the dip in quality after those opening hours is undeniable. 5. Sonic Adventure 2. 1998's Sonic Adventure was the first major 3D Sonic game, and despite releasing on the doomed Dreamcast, was regarded by many critics as a major return to form for Sonic. Though, as evident by anyone who's played it recently, it has aged horribly. Sega then released a sequel in 2001, which opened with a level fondly remembered by fans almost 20 years later, and one that, until the recent release of Sonic Mania, represented arguably the most kinetic and on-brand Sonic levels since the Mega Drive. City Escape saw the player racing around the streets of San Francisco whilst attempting to avoid a military pursuit, leading to Sonic racing away from a gigantic truck. It is ludicrously fast, adrenaline-infused, beautifully laid out, and exactly the way that any Sonic game should begin. Unfortunately, though, the rest of the game is beleaguered by an infuriating camera and controls, the woefully tedious Knuckles levels, an excess of glitches, and a generally dated feel. But that first level, at the very least, remains pure gold even when played today. 4. BioShock Infinite. The opening 2 or so hours of BioShock Infinite sure are fantastic, though it is safe to say that once you make contact with Elizabeth and the game proper kicks off, it disappointingly loses a good deal of its luster. But what an opening! Taking the boat to the lighthouse, travelling to the airborne city of Columbia, and then getting to explore it at your own leisure. It ranks among the finest first act world building of any game ever, taking full advantage of lush art direction and a compelling mystery to lure players in. Interest tapers off once you realise it is not quite as much of a BioShock game as many were hoping for, though, confirming that Irrational Games spunked all of their resources on giving players an unforgettable opening gambit and had little left in the tank for the remainder. Overall, Infinite is not a bad game, but it certainly disappointed many, with an overtly linear approach which seemed to betray the promise of those early passages. 3. God of War 3. The God of War games are all best remembered for their impossibly epic boss fights, and God of War 3 decisively sought to one-up its predecessors right from the jump with its mind-meltingly incredible battle between Kratos and Poseidon. At the time of its release, the cinematic quality of this battle was virtually unrivaled, concluding with Kratos annihilating Poseidon and being thrown into the river Styx by Zeus, setting the rest of the game in motion. But it was also a sequence so damn awesome that the rest of the game strained to get close to its level of high-wire suspense and sheer visceral appeal. The next boss fight against Hades was so pathetically simple arena fight by comparison, and only really the ludicrous Kronos battle gets even close to marrying the sense of scale and bloody artistry together in such an engrossing way. To be clear, God of War 3 is a brilliant game all things considered, but it also gave players the best of itself in its opening half hour, and nothing else reached the same high peak. 2. Crysis. Crysis was one of the most anticipated video games of its generation, a sci-fi FPS with system requirements that can make modern gaming rigs blush over a decade later. And there is no denying that it made one hell of a first impression. The facial animations were unparalleled, and jumping from a plane down to the Lingshan Islands was staggeringly impressive. It all culminates with the eye-watering moment where the sunny vista unfolds before you, set to the gloriously epic track First Light. It is a goosebump-raising moment and caps a simple yet deliciously effective and visually gorgeous primer for the rest of the game. Though the nanosuit is a damn blast to use through Crysis's campaign, it is also fair to say that the novelty does begin to wear off amid the relatively formulaic and repetitive core shooter gameplay that follows. Thankfully, Crysis is short and doesn't outstay its welcome. Yet there is also no topping the majesty of that lush opening. 1. Prey, 2006 and 2017. And our list concludes with a twofer. 2 video games in the same franchise with the same name that effectively repeated the same damn mistake. 2006's horror FPS Prey begins with protagonist Tommy getting into a bar fight, when out of nowhere, Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper blares out of the jukebox and a spaceship descends upon the bar, kidnapping Tommy along with his girlfriend and grandfather. Sadly, the rest of the game can't even begin to live up to that stunner of an opening, with its depressingly low difficulty and increasingly goofy narrative ensuring it failed to break out of its small cult of fandom. But after acquiring the Prey property in 2009, Bethesda finally rebooted the franchise with 2017's new game of the same name, which again dished up an unforgettable opening sequence before lurching into far more familiar gameplay patterns. The first half hour of the game actually takes place within a simulation on board Talos 1, the spaceship you're supposed to be heading towards imminently, after which the player is invited to break out of the simulation and battle the alien species on board the vessel known as the Typhon. Prey 2017 certainly wasn't bad, but the shock and awe of that opening is so much more dynamic than the rest of the game, sadly. And that's our list. What game do you think peaked too early? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. I've been Ash, and this has been WhatCulture Gaming. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and come back every day for more lovely content. Thanks for watching.